Hey, so a couple of weeks ago, I sent out an email to the Practical Ielts mailing list asking for real Ielts essays from real Ielts learners that they wouldn't mind us having a look at in a video series, including one that you're watching right now. So today's essay is by a student called Nelson, and I think this is a really good example of an essay that is almost at a 7, but it also doesn't even score a 6.5 overall. In fact, this is actually a band 6 essay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down into the 4 grading criteria that we use for IELTS writing, and I'm going to go through why it gets a 6 overall, and I'm also going to give some tips at the end. Now, if you want to take a look at the essay Nelson sent in, you can find it down below in the description, and you can also find a link so you can join our mailing list and you can have opportunities to have your essays looked at, like I've done for Nelson here. So let's jump straight in. Okay, so we're going to start with the first grading criteria, which is task response. And task response is all about how well you respond to the task or the question that you've been given. Now, you can see here that what we've got is a 2-question question or a 2-part question. These are a little bit rarer than some of the other question types you'll see in the IELTS exam, but they're also still fairly common. Now, what Nelson's done here is he's answered both of the questions he's been given. All right, so if you have a look at the essay down below, you'll see that he's dedicated the first body paragraph to the first of these questions and the second body paragraph to the second of these questions. And that is exactly what you want to do if you have a 2-question question or a 2-part question. Now, while he's answered both of these questions, I do also think you could be a little bit more specific with how he's gone about answering them. So if we have a look at these 2 topic sentences here, the first one says, social technology has changed the way information is passed on. But it doesn't really say how is it passed on or what the change has been. So that could be a little bit more specific. And the second one says that technological devices have greatly impacted our lives in positive and negative ways. But this is also quite vague. It doesn't really tell me what the rest of the sentence is going to be about. And so not having a really clear idea for both of these topic sentences really harms you. And if you want to find out more about topic sentences, you can find our video on that and it will help you out a bunch. So overall for this one, I would say good job on responding to the question type correctly, but you also need to have that more specific kind of a response in each of the body paragraphs to get above a grade 6 for this one. So I'm afraid this is capped at a grade 6. But you can see already that this is very close to being a 7 for task response because they just need to be a little bit more specific with their topic sentences. So if Nelson did that, then it'd be very easy to bump that up to a 7. And that's the sort of thing you can learn in less than a week. Okay, our second band is called Coherence and Cohesion. And Coherence and Cohesion is all about how well you build paragraphs and how well you build flow into your essay. Now, flow includes flow from the introduction to the rest of the essay into the conclusion, and also within paragraphs. And one of the ways we build flow into our paragraphs is something called a cohesive device. And this learner has definitely included some cohesive devices here. So they've used ones like moreover, which is for giving another reason for something. Additionally is another one we use to give another reason for something. And they've also used for instance, which is another way of saying for example. And they've used these basically to connect the current sentence to the previous sentence. And we kind of show the relationship between our current sentence and our previous sentence using these. So cohesive devices are really important, and they've definitely tried to use some cohesive devices in here, which is really great. Okay, now we can also see some problems with how cohesive devices have been used in this essay. So we have this is because, and Nelson's going to put a comma after this as if it's a cohesive device. This is actually the subject of the sentence. So we don't need to put a comma after that. They've also used because of this, and I think this is a little bit informal for IELTS writing. I would say something along the lines of for this reason, and that's basically just saying what the consequences of something are. So that's a really useful one you can use, but it's a bit more formal than because of this. Now we also have some problems using for instance here. Now we use for instance, it basically means the same as for example, and we use it to give an example of something that we've kind of explained in the previous sentence. Now here Nelson is talking about scientists being able to predict climate change and climate changes and that being able to help people. And they also say, for instance, deaf people are now able to drive cars, which has been made possible by the use of technological devices. Now, I'm not sure about that last bit. I don't know anything about this, but I do know that this isn't really connected to the previous sentence. This isn't an example of what they were just talking about. And so if you're giving an example, it really has to be an example of what you were just talking about. You can't just randomly give an example of something completely different. And especially when you're using for instance, you can't do that. So that is kind of a mistake. So overall, I said they've definitely tried to use cohesive devices. As I said before, the problems with paragraphing will also affect the coherence and cohesion grade because the paragraphs don't have as strong an idea at the core of them as they could do. Like I said, the paragraphs do have an idea there, and they also do a good job of linking the body paragraphs into the introduction and the conclusion, which is something everyone should be trying to do in their IELTS essay. So overall, I'm feeling a 6 on this one, but I do think it's so close to a 7, and just by making a few little changes, studying cohesive devices and making sure they can avoid some mistakes in them, and maybe getting a bit of feedback on cohesive devices, this one would be at a 7 in very little time at all. Now, for lexical resource, I do think generally this essay has a fairly good range of vocabulary. And there's also some good collocation, which is what I want to focus on a little bit now. So collocation is when words go together and you hear words that go together all the time, you kind of pick up on it, and when you repeat them, it sounds nice. And when you don't repeat them, it doesn't sound nice. When you use a different combination of words, it can sound a little bit weird or strange. So there are some examples of good collocation in this essay. Have greatly impacted our lives. Greatly impacted is really good example of words that go together. People are able to keep in touch with their family and friends across the globe. Keep in touch with family and friends, those words definitely go together. Across the globe definitely goes together. It sounds a bit weird to say all over the globe. It makes sense, but we don't usually put those words together. So that's a really good example. Check on their relatives. Check on and relatives, really good collocation. So there are some really good examples of this in this essay. Now, there are also a few mistakes, which I just want to highlight because it will really help you understand what collocation is. So the first one I think is kind of bizarre when you think about it. They said both negative and positive ways. And for whatever reason, when we use English, when we say positive and negative, it's always going to be positive and negative. It's really, really rare to hear negative and positive that way around. And I don't know why that is. That's just what people say. And that is an example of exactly what collocation is. Now, we also have technology devices, technology advancement. I would say technological devices and technological advancement. That's probably what you're going to hear more frequently than technology devices. And the last one I have here is mobile application. This is probably really good collocation, even 10 years ago. But nowadays, I think everyone just says app or application because it's just become such a common word that you don't need to say mobile application. So these are some of the examples of collocations that could be different in this essay. Generally quite a good range, some good collocation, but also some errors. So I think this one is a 6 or a 7. I put 6/7. I think it might creep up into 7 territory, to be honest, but there are quite a few errors with collocation. There's also quite a few spelling mistakes. So I think this one is really on the borderline. It's probably the best aspect of this essay overall. Okay, our final category is grammatical range and accuracy, and this is, like the name suggests, all about using grammar. Now, there are some good complex sentences here, but I think a lot of the time Nelson's tried to introduce complexity by using and it's a bit too much. So I would suggest taking a look at some of our videos and trying to find out some different types of complex grammar you can use, because there are definitely a few. You don't really need to know that many different types of complex grammar. You just need a few you can introduce and use really well. Don't use and all the time to introduce complex grammar. Find some different ways of doing it. We also have some grammar mistakes that need fixing in this essay, and a lot of them are to do with commas. So I've highlighted one of those here. So in this sentence, they've used a comma. They also haven't put a space next to the comma. Always put a space after a comma. It's still 2 different words, so you still need that space. But you don't need this comma here. And the reason for that is it's not what we call an independent clause. Now, what that means is if you take the 2 halves of this sentence, only one of them could be a sentence on its own. So if you say people can check on their relatives and friends, that makes sense on its own. So you can have that as a sentence. That one can be an independent clause. But the second half, and also be informed about current news, isn't a complete sentence on its own. So because that's not a complete sentence, you don't need to use a comma here. So only when you're combining 2 things that could be a complete sentence on their own do you need a comma. So definitely swat up on that. It's a really common mistake around this level, and it's probably a fairly easy one to fix. You just need to remember, is this 2 separate sentences that I'm putting together, or is one of them kind of not enough to be a sentence on its own? Now, if I was fixing this, there's also a few little other things I've done. Actually, friends and relatives is another example of collocation. We very rarely say relatives or friends, so I've switched that around. And I've also switched be informed for stay informed, because I think that's just a little bit more specifically what you mean here. I've also picked out this sentence as one that's really easy to make a big improvement to. So the first mistake I spotted here is predict climate pattern. Well, there's not just one of those, is there? It should be patterns with an S, because scientists will try and predict a lot of different things. The second thing I've done is I've just kind of cleaned up the grammar a little bit at the end here, because hence making people prepared and to avoid adverse climate, I would say, which can help prepare people to avoid adverse climate, such as floods and droughts. That's a bit closer to what you mean. And the last thing I've done here is I've turned this into an appositive, which is a type of advanced grammar where you separate off some information using a comma. And this is one of the easiest ways to boost your grammar score. So if you want to learn more about that, if you've not heard of an appositive, definitely check out our video on that as well. Okay, so for grammatical range and accuracy, I would also say this one gets a 6, but I think you'll agree this is another one where they're very, very close to getting to a 7. They're only trying to include some different types of complex grammar, but there's too many and sentences. So by doing things like using appositives, using sentences that start with if, you can boost that grammar score really, really quickly. So overall, this essay, I've given it a 6, but you can see task response so close to a 7. They just need to tighten up those topic sentences. You can learn how to do that in 1 or 2 classes. Coherence and cohesion, I think, suffers from some of the same problems as task response, and they also need to look at how they're using cohesive devices. Lexical resource might already be at a 7. It's not enough to bring up the whole score to a 7, but I think it's almost there. They just need to have someone have a little bit of a look at their essay and just make sure that they're not making mistakes with how they use words. And finally, grammatical range and accuracy. This is really, really easy to fix. You just need to learn a few different types of complex grammar that you can use to really show off the range you have. So overall, this will get a 6, but like I said, this is so close to a 7 when you look at it objectively. And so the main lesson I want you to take away from this, if you're watching this, is it might seem sometimes like 6 to 7 is a really big jump, or 7 to 8 is a really big jump, but for a lot of people, they're actually much closer than they think. And even if your band isn't 6.5 already, you can get to a 7 very quickly if you focus on the right things and don't just practice aimlessly. So I hope that's really helpful for you. What band would you give this? Drop a comment down below and let me know. And make sure you subscribe to our mailing list, subscribe to this channel, and like this video so you can stay informed about all of the new IELTS writing and other IELTS materials we're putting out there.